The rain had not stopped since before dawn. It fell over Chicago in long silver sheets, turning the streets outside St. Vincent Medical Center into mirrors that reflected nothing clearly, only light, movement, and the blurred shapes of people trying to get somewhere warm. Margaret Ellen Torres stood at the top of the emergency exit steps and let the cold air reach her face for just a moment before she moved. 12 hours. 12 hours of holding other people's pain in her hands, of making decisions in seconds, of saying the right thing to families who had no more room for wrong things. She was 34 years old and had been a nurse for 9 of those years, and she loved this work the way you love something that costs you, completely and with full knowledge of the price. She checked her phone. Her rideshare was waiting near the entrance. She saw a dark sedan idling at the curb, its rear door slightly open, and she crossed the wet sidewalk without a second thought, climbed inside, and sank into the back seat. The leather was soft. The cabin was warm and utterly quiet. No alarms, no names being called down a hallway. The exhaustion she had been out running for 12 hours finally caught her, and Margaret closed her eyes and was gone. She did not mean to fall asleep, but the body, when it has given everything it has, does not ask permission. She woke to the sound of someone clearing their throat, quiet, patient, not unkind. She sat up sharply and found herself looking at a man on the far side of the rear seat. Late 30s, broad-shouldered, a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been made for no one else. His face was calm and still in the way of someone who had learned stillness not from peace, but from discipline. He looked at her without irritation, without amusement, with a steadiness that was somehow more unsettling than either. "You fell asleep," he said simply. Her stomach dropped. She looked around the car. She looked at the driver. She looked back at the man. "This isn't my rideshare," she said. "No," he replied. "It isn't." The apology that came out of her was breathless and tangled, and the man listened to every word of it without interrupting, without making her feel foolish, without once looking at his phone. When she finally climbed out and walked quickly down the rain-soaked street, she was completely certain she would never see him again. The city held nearly 3 million people. The odds were not in her favor. She was wrong. 4 days later, Margaret was assigned a new patient on the orthopedic recovery floor, room 412. Evelyn Hart, 71 years old, post-surgical recovery following a hip replacement. What the chart did not say was that Evelyn Hart had the particular gift of making every room she entered feel warmer than it had been before she arrived. Within an hour, she had learned the names of 3 nurses, expressed a firm and detailed opinion about hospital coffee, and told Margaret a story about her late husband that made Margaret laugh in the middle of a shift for the first time in days. There was something in Evelyn that reminded Margaret of her own grandmother, not in appearance, but in the quality of her attention. She listened the way people used to listen before the world got so loud. Margaret liked her deeply and immediately, and she found herself checking on room 412 more often than strictly necessary, not because the charts required it, but because the room itself felt like a place worth returning to. It was on the second morning that the knock came. Margaret was reviewing notes near the window when the door opened and a man stepped inside. She heard his voice before she saw his face, and then she turned, and the folder in her hands nearly slipped to the floor. It was him, the man from the car. He stopped when he saw her, and something moved across his still face. Not surprise exactly, but the expression of a man who has just recognized something he thought he had imagined. "Ethan," Evelyn said from her bed, "come in. This is Margaret. She has been taking the most beautiful care of me." Ethan looked at Margaret. Margaret looked at him. "We've met," he said carefully. Evelyn's eyes moved between them with an attention that missed absolutely nothing. "Have you?" she said. It was not a question. Ethan Hart visited every day.
Margaret had been a nurse long enough to read families the way she read charts, quickly, accurately, and beneath the surface. And what she read in Ethan was something that took her longer than usual to name. He was not there out of obligation. He came in the mornings before his day began and in the evenings after it ended. He helped his mother with her lunch tray. He sat through physical therapy and encouraged her through the exercises she hated, not with empty cheerfulness, but with a quiet and unshakable patience. One afternoon, Margaret stood in the doorway and watched him spend 40 minutes listening to Evelyn tell a story about a summer in Michigan 40 years ago, and he listened as though it were the only thing that mattered. It was on the fourth day that Evelyn told Margaret the thing she had not yet known. "He was Army," Evelyn said quietly, while Ethan was down the hall getting coffee. 10 years, 2 deployments. He came home from the second one different, quieter. He lost 2 men he loved like brothers over there. She paused and looked at her hands. He never really talked about it. He just came home and built a life and took care of everyone around him and never once asked anyone to take care of him. Margaret stood very still. "He doesn't seem like a man who asks for much," she said. Evelyn looked up at her with the particular clarity of a mother who has watched her child carry something heavy for a very long time. "No," she said softly, "he never has." The story settled into Margaret in the way that certain truths do, not loudly, but permanently. She began to see him differently after that, not the composed man in the charcoal suit.
The soldier who had come home carrying losses he had never set down. The son who showed up every single day, not because it was convenient, but because showing up was the only language he had ever fully trusted. She noticed the way he held his coffee cup with both hands when he was tired. She noticed the way he looked out the window sometimes when his mother was sleeping, seeing something far beyond the Chicago skyline. She noticed that he never spoke about himself unless asked, and even then, only briefly, as though his own story were a room he had long ago decided not to spend much time in. One stormy afternoon, Margaret came to check on Evelyn and found her asleep. She sat in the chair by the window and opened the small poetry collection she kept in her jacket pocket, its spine soft and cracked from years of use, and read quietly to herself while the rain moved against the glass. She did not hear the door open. She became aware of Ethan only when she looked up and found him standing in the doorway, his coat damp, his expression entirely unguarded in a way she had not seen before. He looked younger, like a man who had briefly set down something he had been carrying so long he had forgotten it had a weight. She closed the book. "I didn't know you were there," she said. "I know," he said. "I didn't want you to stop." They sat with the quiet for a moment, and then he asked, in a low voice so as not to wake his mother, "Do you always read to your patients?" Margaret considered the question honestly. "Only the ones I care about," she said. He nodded slowly. She left to return to her rounds. The answer stayed in the room with him long after she was gone. The next morning, there was a cup of coffee waiting at her workstation, black, no sugar, no note, no name. She stood holding it before her shift began and felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not romance, not yet, but something quieter and more foundational than that. The feeling of being noticed by someone who had been paying genuine attention. Evelyn was discharged on a Thursday morning. The sky had finally cleared, and the light through the fourth-floor windows was pale and gold, the kind that feels like something earned. Margaret walked beside her wheelchair down the corridor, and at the elevator, Evelyn took both of Margaret's hands in hers and held them with a firmness that was not frailty, but the opposite of it. "You have a gift," Evelyn said. "Not the clinical kind, though you have that too. The kind that sees people, the kind that makes people feel worth seeing." Margaret felt the words move through her like something warm. "Thank you for letting me take care of you," she said. Evelyn smiled, the way someone smiles when they know something the other person has not yet figured out. The elevator came. Ethan took the handles of the wheelchair. He looked at Margaret over his mother's head and held her gaze for just a moment. No words, no gesture, only the quiet acknowledgement of two people who had come, without planning it, to matter to each other. "Thank you, Margaret," he said. She nodded. The doors closed. She stood in the hallway alone, the morning light warm on her back, and felt the particular stillness that follows something that has not ended, but only paused. It was 3 weeks later when she received a letter, not an email, a letter, handwritten on plain paper in a hand that was careful and deliberate. It said that he had been thinking about what she had said, "Only the ones I care about," and that he had been trying for a long time to stop carrying certain things alone and had not known how to begin. It said that his mother had told him something when she got home that he could not stop thinking about. It said that Evelyn had told him Margaret reminded her of the best kind of person, the kind who gives fully and asks for nothing and somehow never becomes bitter from the giving. The letter did not ask for anything dramatic. It asked only if she might be willing to take a walk someday, Lincoln Park maybe, Sunday afternoon. He would bring coffee. He already knew how she took it. Margaret read the letter twice at her kitchen table on a quiet morning before her shift. Then she folded it carefully and held it in both hands for a long moment. Outside the window, Chicago was waking up, gray and gold and full of its ordinary noise. She thought about a rainy night and a wrong car and a sleeping woman and a man who had not made her feel foolish for it. She thought about a soldier who had come home carrying losses no one could see, who had built a life out of showing up quietly for the people he loved, who had never once asked anyone to carry anything for him. She thought about Evelyn's hands holding hers at the elevator and the words that had settled into her like roots. She thought about black coffee left without a note and poetry read aloud to a sleeping woman and a door held open not with drama but with the simple and enduring dignity of a person who had learned that love, in its truest form, is just another word for attention. She picked up her pen. She wrote one line. "Sunday is good. I'll meet you there." She sealed the envelope and set it on the table and went to get ready for her shift. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she walked out the door feeling not only like someone who gave, but like someone who was, at last, ready to receive. If this story settled something in your heart today, please subscribe to the Kind Soul Stories. Every week, we bring you stories of quiet courage, faithful love, and the unexpected ways good people find each other. Hit the bell, share this with someone who needs something kind today, because a kind word, like a good story, costs nothing and changes everything.
This story honors the invisible weight carried by veterans who return home changed and never speak of it. It dignifies the labor of nurses and caregivers who give fully of themselves and are rarely seen for it. It presents love not as a dramatic event, but as a slow and faithful act of attention, showing up, remembering, paying care to small details. For your older American audience, it affirms that connection is still possible at any stage of life, that the wounds we carry quietly do not disqualify us from tenderness, and that the most meaningful relationships often begin not in grand moments, but in small, unremarkable ones. A wrong car, a cup of coffee, a letter written by hand.